They say love can turn strangers into soulmates, but what happens when it twists soulmates into sworn enemies? Imagine a radiant woman, visibly pregnant with twins, pushing open the heavy wooden doors of a packed courtroom. Her eyes burn with hurt and anger. Across the aisle sits a proud, well-dressed millionaire, refusing to even glance her way. The gavel strikes. The crowd holds its breath. Then comes the judge's simple, devastating question that could shatter a fortune and lay bare every secret. Are these children truly yours? If you think you've seen it all, brace yourself. This drama has only just begun. Harriet Moore could feel every eye in the courthouse on her. While the air conditioning hummed in the background, she caught flashes of camera lenses and the occasional muffled commentary from journalists packed into the gallery. Despite the trembling in her knees, she walked toward the plaintiff's table with her chin high. Her hair was neatly pulled back, revealing a face that still glowed with the evidence of youth, even though worry had etched faint lines near her eyes. She was heavily pregnant, carrying twins. Her floral maternity dress brushed against her legs, and with each step, she felt a mix of trepidation and resolve. She was here to face the man who had turned her world upside down, Sebastian Moretti. The name alone could buy trust or silence in certain circles. The real estate mogul who had built a multi-billion-dollar empire by the time he was just 35. The philanthropic face who had once shaken hands with Bill Gates at a high-profile charity gala. The man whose otherworldly confidence often bordered on arrogance, and the man who, in Harriet's mind, had betrayed her beyond measure. As Harriet took her seat, she glanced at the defense table. Sebastian sat there, looking perfectly composed in a tailored gray suit that complemented his dark, neatly combed hair. He remained focused on a conversation with his lead attorney, Avery Rothschild, a formidable presence in her own right. Avery had a reputation for eviscerating opponents in the courtroom. Rumor had it that she had brokered hush settlements for countless corporate bigwigs, protecting them from scandal after scandal. Harriet's attorney, Tim Kingsley, reached out and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. He was an old family friend, a man who exuded empathy. Harriet felt a wave of gratitude for his presence. She glanced around at the buzzing crowd, noticing that half the spectators seemed to be high society onlookers. Some were probably there out of genuine curiosity, while others smelled blood in the water, eager to watch a privileged millionaire get taken down a peg, or to see an allegedly gold-digging ex get her comeuppance. At precisely 10 o'clock, a bailiff called the court to order. The murmurs died down immediately. Judge Margaret Whitfield entered her black robe, giving her a solemn, regal appearance. Harriet tried to steady her breathing. She knew that this hearing was only the beginning, but it might well determine the future of her unborn children. She gently rested a protective hand on her pregnant belly. "Counsel, are we ready to proceed?" the judge asked. Her tone was measured, authoritative. "Yes, Your Honor," Tim responded, rising to his feet. Sebastian's attorney echoed the affirmation. The judge nodded before looking at Harriet, then at Sebastian. She studied them both for a moment, as if trying to gauge the truth behind all the allegations. Then came the question, so simple, but so explosive, that set the tone for the entire trial. Mr. Moretti, Judge Whitfield, said, her voice reverberating in the hushed courtroom. "Is it true that you fathered these children?" A single beat of silence. Harriet felt the tension in the air tighten like a noose around her heart. Sebastian opened his mouth, ready to issue his carefully prepared response. And in that moment, Harriet thought of how all this had begun. The whirlwind romance, the glamorous engagements, the broken promises, and the tears that led here. She braced herself for the blow she knew was coming. 3 years earlier, Harriet hadn't been Harriet Moore. She'd still been Harriet Swanson, a small-town girl with big dreams. She'd moved to London after landing a position as a junior interior designer at a boutique agency. She was ambitious, passionate, and yearned to see her ideas turn empty rooms into breathtaking spaces. It was in her second year at the agency that she met Sebastian Moretti. He was the star client that everyone wanted to impress. The media called him a real estate prodigy, a man who bought old hotels and derelict buildings, then transformed them into extravagant wonders. Whispers around the office told Harriet that Sebastian had single-handedly revitalized entire neighborhoods in cities like New York, Rome, and Hong Kong. But Harriet's first impression was more personal. He was simply mesmerizing. Tall, confident, with an unyielding gaze that seemed to pierce anyone who dared look into his eyes. When Harriet first approached him to talk about design concepts for a luxury townhouse in Belgravia, she felt an instant spark. At first she brushed it off as the giddiness of meeting a celebrity client. But as they delved deeper into color palettes, minimalistic furniture, and the interplay of lighting, Harriet realized that Sebastian was more than a wealthy client. He was a deeply creative visionary. He saw angles and perspectives she hadn't even considered. He asked detailed, curious questions about how design choices could reflect inner emotion. He was, in a word, enchanting. What started as a professional rapport quickly morphed into friendly dinners to discuss ideas. Soon, those dinners extended into late-night walks along the Thames, accompanied by laughter and confessions about their childhoods. Harriet learned that Sebastian's upbringing was complicated. His father, Lucas Moretti, was a wealthy businessman with an authoritarian streak. Sebastian had felt overshadowed his entire life, always trying to prove his worth to a man who measured success purely in financial terms. On a cold December night, after sharing a bottle of red wine, Harriet found herself wrapped in Sebastian's arms under a mist of fairy lights. Snow fell softly as he leaned in and kissed her. It felt like a scene from a romance movie, and Harriet had never been happier. She didn't see the subtle warning signs, the quick temper that flashed behind Sebastian's charming facade, the controlling edge that sometimes took over their conversations. At the time, she was too enthralled by the fairy tale. Within 6 months, Harriet and Sebastian were inseparable. Their romance became the talk of the design agency. No one had ever seen Sebastian so openly affectionate. He sent Harriet extravagant bouquets of roses at work, whisked her away for surprise weekends in the countryside, and even introduced her to some of his high-profile friends in philanthropic circles, including a charity gala where Harriet found herself chatting with Bill Gates about sustainable design. Harriet's parents, who lived in a modest home 2 hours north, were both alarmed and intrigued by her whirlwind romance. Her mother, Fiona, warned her not to let starry eyes overshadow common sense. But Harriet was head over heels convinced that she had found the one. So when Sebastian proposed under the flickering lights of a cozy restaurant by the sea, Harriet said yes, tears of joy streaming down her face. Looking back, Harriet would often ask herself if she had truly known the man she was marrying. Because behind the curtain of a perfect engagement lurked problems that would slowly unravel, threatening to destroy not just their relationship, but the very foundation on which Harriet had built her dreams. The newlyweds settled into a sprawling penthouse in Kensington, an opulent fortress of glass and steel perched above the city. Harriet should have been thrilled. After all, she was able to bring her design dreams to life in a space most people could only imagine. But she soon discovered that Sebastian was as demanding in his personal life as he was in business. Every inch of the penthouse had to meet his exacting standards. Colors, furnishings, even the arrangement of coffee table books, everything had to be perfect. At first, Harriet believed it was just Sebastian's passion for aesthetics, and she tried to accommodate his every whim. But then she noticed other behaviors. He asked her to leave her job because he believed her time was better spent on philanthropic projects for the Moretti Foundation. He insisted on monitoring her finances, pointing out that he was building a united future for both of them. Over time, Harriet's sense of independence dwindled, replaced by a quiet anxiety that she was losing herself. Yet they had their tender moments. In public, Sebastian was the doting husband, praising Harriet's talents to anyone who would listen. He donated large sums to her favorite charities, often in her name. She felt loved, even pampered. But behind closed doors, they fought about money, about Harriet's role, about the possibility of starting a family. Sebastian was hesitant. He claimed that children would be a distraction from his empire building. Harriet wanted children eventually, but she tiptoed around the subject, trying not to inflame Sebastian's temper. One evening, Harriet overheard Sebastian arguing on the phone in his study. The door was ajar, just enough for her to catch phrases like, "I don't care about the legalities, and if you try to cut me out, I swear you'll regret it." Harriet's heart pounded. She'd never heard Sebastian sound so hostile. When he emerged, he wore a forced smile, dismissing her questions with a brusque, "Just business. You wouldn't understand." Soon after, Harriet discovered documents on Sebastian's desk referencing secret deals in countries she didn't even know he operated in. When she confronted him, he snapped that she shouldn't snoop around. His anger, albeit short-lived, was enough to make Harriet wary of crossing him again. But Harriet's growing unease was overshadowed by a piece of unexpected news: she was pregnant. She found out one morning after feeling unusually lightheaded. A simple test turned her whole world inside out. Was Sebastian going to be furious or thrilled? She was too scared to find out, but she had no choice. She picked an evening when Sebastian seemed in a good mood, having just closed a lucrative deal. Over a quiet dinner, Harriet mustered the courage to announce her pregnancy. For a moment, Sebastian's face lit up. He smiled genuinely, and Harriet's heart soared. They embraced, and in that fleeting instance, Harriet believed everything would be okay. But that initial sparkle of joy faded quickly. The next day, Sebastian looked anxious, complaining about how the pregnancy might derail their travels and business commitments. The doctor's confirmation that Harriet was carrying twins didn't ease his concerns, it magnified them. Harriet tried to remain positive, imagining that once the babies arrived, Sebastian would fall in love with them. However, the cracks continued to deepen. By the time Harriet was in her second trimester, she was feeling more alone than ever. Sebastian was away on business trips, leaving Harriet to navigate her pregnancy with minimal support. And then came the argument that would change everything. Harriet recalled the last time she felt truly safe. She had been sitting in her childhood bedroom reading a letter from Sebastian while her mother fussed over dinner. That memory felt like a dream as she stared at the letters spread out on the coffee table in the penthouse. Letters from attorneys, from accountants, from unknown business associates, all pointing to something dark beneath Sebastian's empire. The fight erupted after Harriet accidentally opened a letter from a firm in the Cayman Islands. It contained details about a secret offshore account in Sebastian's name. The sum of money inside was staggering, far beyond anything Harriet had imagined. She confronted Sebastian the moment he came through the door. "How long have you been hiding this from me?" she demanded, hands trembling. And why Sebastian, exhausted from a late flight, slammed his briefcase onto the table. "That's none of your concern," he snapped. His eyes blazed with a fury Harriet had never seen before. "It's just business. You don't understand the complexities. Don't treat me like a child," Harriet shot back. Her voice cracked, but she refused to back down. She was pregnant with his twins, and he was shrouding himself in secrecy. Her fear tangled with anger, fueling her determination. "We're supposed to be partners. We're married. Don't I deserve an explanation?" Sebastian's expression hardened, and for a moment, Harriet thought he might raise his hand. Instead, he shattered a crystal vase on the floor with one swift motion of his arm. "Don't push me," he growled. "The business is mine to run as I see fit. Not everything belongs in your precious bubble of trust and honesty." Tears slid down Harriet's cheeks as she clutched her belly. She realized then that she was dealing with someone who had deeper secrets than she'd ever guessed. "If we can't talk about this, then I'm leaving. I'm pregnant with our children, and you act like your empire matters more." Sebastian hesitated, a flash of regret surfacing in his eyes, but then he doubled down. "You won't leave. You think you can just walk away with my children? I'll tie this up in the courts so tightly you'll never see a penny. And those kids," his tone dropped cold and deadly, "they'll come with me." That was the final blow. Harriet felt an indescribable pain in her chest, as if she were suffocating in the penthouse's polished air. She turned and ran to the guest room, locking the door. She spent the night there, sobbing into her pillow. By morning, she had resolved to leave Sebastian no matter the cost. With the help of her friend and attorney, Tim Kingsley, Harriet fled to a small apartment on the outskirts of London. She had just enough savings to last a few months. In the beginning, Sebastian tried to coax her back with flowers, texts, phone calls, but she ignored every gesture. The mention of my children still echoed ominously in her mind. Eventually, his pleas stopped. A cold silence settled in. Harriet used that time to gather evidence, bank statements, correspondences, anything that might protect her and her unborn twins if Sebastian tried to legally wrest them from her. She stayed up late, scanning documents and emailing Tim. Each new discovery painted a murky picture of Sebastian's global business dealings. Harriet was astonished by the vast web of power he wielded and the lengths he might go to keep it intact. Then, without warning, Harriet received a court summons. Sebastian was seeking an injunction to have Harriet declared mentally unfit to care for their children, aiming to secure sole custody. The news hit Harriet like a sledgehammer. She refused to be bullied. If Sebastian wanted a fight, she would give him one, no matter how scared she felt inside. That's how Harriet found herself in that crowded courtroom, defiantly stepping forward, heavily pregnant to face the man she once loved. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Harriet sat behind Tim, flipping through pages of evidence they'd compiled against Sebastian. Across the aisle, Avery Rothschild made a great show of rearranging her neatly tabbed files. Sebastian sat statue still, his eyes fixed on the judge. It was as though Harriet did not exist. "Mr. Moretti, the court requires clarity," Judge Whitfield began. "Is Ms. Moore carrying your children?" Sebastian's face remained impassive. "Yes, Your Honor," he replied after a pregnant pause. "But I have concerns about Ms. Moore's fitness as a mother. She left our marital home without notice, and I believe her actions indicate she may be mentally unstable." Harriet felt her heart hammer against her ribs. She clenched her fists under the table. Could Sebastian really paint her as unstable? She glanced at Tim, who gave her a reassuring nod. Judge Whitfield's gaze shifted to Harriet. "Ms. Moore, how do you respond to these allegations of mental instability?" Harriet rose, doing her best to steady her voice. "I am not unstable, Your Honor. I left because I feared for my safety and the safety of my unborn children. My husband's temper, his secrecy, and his threats left me with no choice. Tim signaled Harriet to bring out the evidence. She laid out the offshore account statements and questionable business contracts, highlighting the suspicious dealings tied to Sebastian's name. It was a calculated risk. They wanted to demonstrate that Harriet had reason to fear Sebastian's potential for manipulation, both financially and emotionally. Sebastian's attorney, Avery, objected vehemently. "Your Honor, this is a blatant attempt to mischaracterize my client's business affairs. These documents are incomplete, potentially even tampered with. Ms. Moore isn't a forensic accountant. She's an interior designer." A hush fell over the room as the judge carefully examined the papers Harriet had submitted. "I'm not a financial expert," Judge Whitfield finally said, "but I can see there's more to this than meets the eye. Ms. Moore, do you have witnesses or further evidence to support your claim?" Harriet swallowed hard. This was where Tim had advised her to bring up personal accounts, text messages, and testimonies from people who had witnessed Sebastian's behavior. She called upon a former housekeeper, an older woman named Rosa, who described nights of raised voices and Sebastian's smashing of household items whenever business deals went awry. Rosa had once seen Harriet sobbing, locked in the guest room. She had worried for Harriet's safety, but was too afraid to lose her job to speak up until now. As Rosa spoke, Harriet felt a pang of guilt. She never wanted to drag the staff into this fiasco, but the truth had to come out. Rosa's testimony painted a picture of a household fraught with tension, a far cry from the glamorous facade Sebastian had presented to the world. When it was Sebastian's turn to testify, he kept his composure, denying all of Harriet's claims. He insisted that Harriet was overly sensitive, that the broken vases and raised voices were the unfortunate side effects of his high-stress career. He portrayed Harriet as someone prone to exaggeration, seeking to damage his reputation as a power play in a custody battle. But Harriet refused to let Sebastian's polished words overshadow the reality. She knew she had to stay strong. In a moment of high tension, Tim revealed photographs Harriet had taken on her phone, images of shattered glass holes, punched-in walls, even Harriet's bruised arm from one particularly volatile confrontation, though Harriet had never reported it to the police, fearing retaliation at the time. Sebastian's lawyer attempted to dismiss the bruise as an accident, but the judge was clearly troubled. She announced she would allow the evidence to stand. The court would reconvene after further review, and both parties were instructed to refrain from any hostile contact. Outside the courtroom, journalists swarmed, shouting questions. Harriet clutched Tim's arm, trying to push past the crowd. She spotted Sebastian across the marble foyer, calmly walking in the opposite direction with Avery. He didn't look at Harriet once. Little did Harriet know the tension in the courtroom was only the first salvo. Sebastian was far from finished, and before this legal battle concluded, more shocking secrets would surface, threatening to break Harriet's spirit, or perhaps free it forever. In the days following the initial hearing, Harriet was on edge. She stayed at Tim's office late into the night, helping comb through more of Sebastian's documents. Every once in a while, Harriet wondered if she was doing the right thing. Was it wise to go up against a man of Sebastian's power and wealth? But then she'd feel the twins move inside her, tiny reminders that she had no choice. She had to protect them. Her phone buzzed one evening as she sat in Tim's conference room. An unknown number. Reluctantly, Harriet answered. A low, shaky voice whispered on the other end, "Meet me at the St. Joseph's parking lot tonight at 8. Alone." A click ended the call before Harriet could respond. Alarmed, Harriet shared the mysterious call with Tim. This could be a trap, Tim warned, but it could also be someone with information we need. Harriet's stomach churned. She knew it was risky, but she couldn't ignore a potential lead. Later that evening, Harriet pulled into the dimly lit parking lot of St. Joseph's Church, her heart thumping wildly. She had Tim on standby, ready to call the police if anything felt off. A hooded figure approached, glancing around, as though fearful of being watched. As the person stepped into the light, Harriet recognized the face, Sebastian's younger half-brother, Oliver Moretti. Harriet had only met Oliver a handful of times, but she recalled that he was soft-spoken, seemingly overshadowed by Sebastian's commanding presence. "Oliver," Harriet asked, voice trembling, "what are you doing here?" He pulled down his hood, revealing bloodshot eyes. "Harriet, I had to warn you," he said, voice cracking. "Sebastian's father, my father too, Lucas Moretti, is pulling the strings behind the scenes. He's pressuring Sebastian to paint you as unfit. Lucas is the one who set up those offshore accounts, and he won't hesitate to drag you through the mud if it means preserving the Moretti name." Harriet felt a cold weight settle in her chest. She knew Lucas had always been a looming, silent figure in Sebastian's life, but she didn't realize he'd go this far. Why would he do that? Oliver took a deep breath. "Lucas sees you as a threat, Harriet. He thinks you're looking to siphon off a chunk of the family fortune. He's convinced Sebastian that if you gain custody, you'll have a permanent hold over him, child support, lawsuits, everything. Sebastian is stubborn, but he's also desperate for his father's approval." Harriet's eyes stung with tears. It was bad enough to be fighting Sebastian, but going up against Lucas Moretti, a veteran tycoon, rumored to have ties to shady business deals, felt insurmountable. "Why are you telling me this?" Harriet asked. Oliver's gaze darted around nervously. "Because I know what it's like to be chewed up and spit out by that family," he whispered. "I'm Lucas's illegitimate son. Remember, the only reason I exist in the family's orbit is to prop up Sebastian, to be his spare if anything happens, and I can't stomach seeing two innocent children used as pawns." Harriet placed a trembling hand over her mouth. She had never considered Oliver an ally. He'd always been so distant and overshadowed. Yet here he was, risking his father's wrath to tip her off. "Thank you," Harriet managed. "But what do I do?" Oliver reached into his pocket, pulling out a USB drive. "I copied some files from Lucas's personal server. Financial records, emails, offshore transfers. Enough to show the judge that Sebastian and Lucas have orchestrated more than just legitimate business deals. But Harriet, use it wisely. Once Lucas knows these files are out, he'll come after me too." Harriet felt an overwhelming surge of gratitude. For the first time, she felt a glimmer of real hope. "I'll protect you any way I can," she promised. Oliver simply nodded, his expression solemn. He pressed the USB into Harriet's hand and vanished into the darkness. Harriet clutched the small device as though it were a lifeline. She returned to her car, called Tim, and recounted the entire encounter. Tim was speechless for a moment. "This could be the breakthrough we need, Harriet. We'll comb through every detail." But Harriet couldn't shake the dread pooling in her gut. She knew that unveiling Lucas's involvement was like stepping on a hornet's nest. Still, Harriet was resolute. For her unborn twins, she would endure any storm. In the following weeks, Harriet and Tim pored over Oliver's files. What they found was staggering shell corporations linked to the Moretti Empire, bribes paid to government officials in developing countries to secure lucrative land deals, even hush money funneled to former employees who'd threatened to go public with allegations of wrongdoing. One particular email chain caught Harriet's eye. It was between Lucas and Sebastian, dated around the time Harriet had left. Sebastian had written, "We must ensure Harriet doesn't gain leverage. I'm prepared to discredit her in court, but she might reveal the existence of certain accounts." Lucas replied, "Handle her swiftly. Our name and fortune cannot be compromised. Harriet's hands shook as she read those lines. To see her husband plotting with his father to handle her was more painful than she could have imagined, but it also hardened her resolve. No matter how wealthy or influential the Moretti family was, they were not above the law. At the same time, Harriet wrestled with heartbreak. She remembered how Sebastian once confided in her about feeling overshadowed by Lucas, longing for a father's love that never materialized. How ironic that Sebastian would now become the very instrument of his father's malice. If only Harriet had seen the warning signs sooner. Meanwhile, Tim prepared to request the court's permission to introduce these new documents as evidence. The plan was perilous. Lucas Moretti had a legion of lawyers at his disposal, and they would fight tooth and nail to keep anything incriminating sealed. But Harriet had no other option. She would not let her children be born into a world of intimidation and secrets. The next court session was a battlefield. Sebastian's legal team insisted the newly obtained evidence was stolen property, that Harriet had resorted to illegal hacking. Tim argued that Harriet had received the files from a Moretti family member concerned about wrongdoing within the empire. The judge demanded more context. Sebastian sat with clenched fists. Lucas Moretti himself had decided to make an appearance in the courtroom. The older man resembled a grand puppet master, his silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights, his posture regal. He watched Harriet with steely, impassive eyes. At one point, Tim called Oliver Moretti to the stand. Oliver was visibly anxious, shifting in his seat, eyes occasionally flicking toward his father. Harriet held her breath. She knew the entire case could hinge on Oliver's credibility. "Mr. Oliver Moretti," Tim began, "can you confirm you provided Ms. Moore with the USB drive containing financial records belonging to your family?" Oliver nodded, glancing nervously at his father, then at Sebastian. "Yes, I couldn't stay silent anymore," he replied. "I have seen the lengths my father and Sebastian will go to protect their business interests, even if it means destroying Harriet's reputation and denying her a fair chance to raise her children." The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Lucas Moretti's attorney immediately objected, calling Oliver a disgruntled child seeking attention. The judge silenced them with a stern glare, reminding them that Oliver was under oath. He continued detailing some of the questionable dealings he knew about payments for sabotage of competing businesses, hush money for ex-employees. Then he admitted something that sent shockwaves through the room. "I was tasked to spy on Harriet," Oliver confessed. "My father wanted me to find dirt on her, to discredit her if she became a threat. But when I saw how she was treated, especially carrying Sebastian's twins, I couldn't do it anymore." A hush swallowed the courtroom. Harriet felt tears well up in her eyes. She looked at Sebastian, whose face was pale. For a moment, he appeared almost remorseful, but quickly masked it with a glare of contempt directed at Oliver. The judge requested a recess to review the new evidence. Harriet and Tim left the courtroom, exhausted but relieved. "It looks like the truth is finally coming to light," Tim whispered. Harriet nodded, though her mind was heavy with conflicting emotions. Exposing the Moretti family's corruption was necessary for her children's safety, but it also spelled the complete breakdown of the man she once loved. She wondered if Sebastian would ever realize the sun of aligning himself with Lucas's ruthless schemes. With the weight of the trial pressing down on her, Harriet found solace in small acts of everyday life, like folding baby clothes in her modest apartment or reading parenting magazines that Tim's wife had given her. Yet each day brought a new wave of anxiety, especially as the court date for final arguments loomed. Harriet's health began to suffer under the relentless stress. One morning she woke with dizziness and shortness of breath. Tim insisted she see a doctor. At the hospital, Harriet learned she had dangerously high blood pressure, a potential risk to both her and the twins. The doctor advised her to limit stress and consider bed rest if her condition worsened. But how could she rest? The thought of losing custody of her babies to a manipulative father terrified her. The possibility of Sebastian's empire overshadowing her every move haunted her nightmares. She recalled all the times Sebastian had sweetly promised they would become a loving family one day. Those promises now felt like shards of broken glass, cutting into her every hope. Despite her deteriorating health, Harriet had no choice but to attend another crucial hearing. Lucas Moretti's lawyers were attempting to have the USB drive evidence deemed inadmissible, claiming it was stolen property, and that Harriet had coerced Oliver. The day of the hearing, Harriet stood by Tim, trying to ignore the unsteadiness in her legs. The judge listened patiently to both sides, then made a decisive ruling. In the interest of justice, the court will allow the evidence to remain provided that Oliver Moretti's testimony is verified and found credible. A wave of relief washed over Harriet, but it was short-lived. Lucas, who had been sitting stoically through the proceedings, stood up and addressed the judge. "Your Honor," he said, in a voice that commanded attention, "I find it appalling that we are tarnishing the reputation of my family over the words of my disgruntled son. I will ensure the truth comes out that Ms. Moore has been manipulating Oliver for her own gain." Harriet felt her vision blur. She could barely stand as a wave of dizziness engulfed her. She gripped the edge of the table, heart pounding. Tim noticed and immediately signaled for assistance. The next moments were a chaotic blur, Harriet collapsing Tim, catching her court personnel rushing forward. She heard Sebastian's voice somewhere in the chaos yelling, "Someone call an ambulance." Harriet's last conscious thought before darkness claimed her was a desperate plea, "Please let my babies be okay." When Harriet regained consciousness, she was in a hospital bed with bright fluorescent lights overhead. Monitors beeped softly, and a nurse stood near her, checking her vitals. Tim was there looking anxious and relieved at the same time. "You fainted from exhaustion and stress," Tim explained, his voice hushed. "But the babies seem fine. The doctor says you need to avoid any further strain. He strongly recommends bed rest, Harriet." She nodded, weakly, tears pooling in her eyes. Her unborn children were safe for now, but the stress had almost jeopardized their lives. Harriet felt an overwhelming guilt. Had she been too stubborn, pushing herself to the brink? "I'll do whatever it takes," she whispered, stroking her belly. "I just want them to be okay." Tim cleared his throat. "There's another matter." Sebastian came by. Harriet's heart sank. "What did he say?" "He seemed genuinely concerned about your health," Tim said, surprised. "He asked if you were stable, if the babies were all right. Then he left. No threats, no posturing, just concern." Harriet's eyes filled with tears again, but this time for an entirely different reason. As much as she resented Sebastian, she had once loved him, and maybe a part of her still did. She remembered the time he gently massaged her feet after a long day, the nights they laughed over silly jokes. Was it possible that somewhere beneath the layers of arrogance and manipulation Sebastian still cared? She slept fitfully that night, drifting in and out of confusing dreams about Sebastian, Lucas, and Oliver. When morning came, Harriet's phone buzzed with an unknown number again. She hesitated, then answered. "Harriet, it's me," said the voice on the other end. "Sebastian." Her stomach clenched. She almost hung up, but curiosity kept her on the line. "I heard you were hospitalized," Sebastian said, his tone subdued. I just wanted to see if you're okay." Harriet took a shaky breath. "I'm coping," she replied, her voice cold. "Why are you calling a pause? I've been rethinking things, Harriet, about what this is doing to you and to the babies. I never wanted you to get hurt." Harriet closed her eyes, memories flooding back. "You never wanted me to get hurt," she repeated bitterly. "Then why team up with your father to discredit me?" Sebastian inhaled sharply on the other end. "It's complicated. You don't understand the pressure from Lucas. The business is everything to him, and he expects the same from me. I don't want to fight anymore. Maybe we can meet just to talk." Harriet felt her chest tighten. Was this a trap or genuine remorse? She thought of Oliver's warning. Lucas would stop at nothing to protect the family. But if Sebastian was truly reconsidering his stance, maybe there was a chance for a peaceful resolution. "I'll think about it," she said tersely, ending the call. Over the next few days, Harriet remained in the hospital monitored closely. Each time the twins kicked, she felt a profound surge of love that strengthened her resolve. She agreed to meet Sebastian, but only in Tim's presence. If it was a trap, at least she'd have legal protection. The meeting was set for a private hospital lounge. Harriet sat in a wheelchair, the doctor's orders to limit physical strain still in effect. Tim stood beside her. Moments later, Sebastian stepped in, wearing a casual blazer, his face drawn with tension. He approached Harriet cautiously. "How are you feeling, alive?" she replied, her tone guarded. "What do you want to discuss?" Sebastian took a chair, elbows resting on his knees. His gaze flickered to Harriet's belly, and for a second, Harriet saw a flicker of genuine worry. "I want to propose a settlement," Sebastian began. "I don't want the court drama anymore. I realize how damaging this is, especially for the children. Let's figure out custody arrangements privately." Tim's eyes narrowed, but Harriet held up a hand to silence him. "You want a settlement? No more attempts to brand me as mentally unfit." Sebastian shook his head. "No more. You can have primary custody. But I want reasonable visitation rights, and I'll provide financial support, of course." His expression wavered. "I just don't want this going to trial. The evidence you have, it's going to drag the entire family through the mud. That includes me." Harriet let out a bitter laugh. There it was, the real reason: self-preservation. She studied Sebastian's face. There was a time when that face brought her comfort. Now, it only triggered complicated emotions: betrayal, sorrow, a faint whisper of affection. "You're afraid of what will come out in court," she said bluntly. Sebastian didn't deny it. "Look, Harriet, maybe this is too little too late, but my father has a stranglehold on me and this empire. If that evidence is made public, it'll all burn. And yes, maybe it should. But he swallowed, struggling. "I'm not proud of certain things, but I want to at least try to protect the future for our kids. If that means giving you custody and letting you walk away with a settlement, so be it." Harriet felt tears brimming. "This isn't just about money," she whispered. "This is about safety, decency, truth. Your father would do anything to keep me quiet, and you'd let him until you realized you might lose everything. Why should I trust you?" Sebastian looked down, silent for a moment. "You're right. You shouldn't trust me. But I'm here anyway, because part of me still cares, despite everything." Tim cleared his throat. "We can negotiate, Mr. Moretti, but Harriet has final say." He cast a questioning glance at Harriet, silently asking for her decision. Harriet knew that a private settlement might end the turmoil sooner. She also knew it meant letting Sebastian and Lucas avoid a public reckoning for their wrongdoings. She closed her eyes, recalling Oliver's bravery in sharing those files. In a quiet, resolute voice, Harriet answered, "I'll consider your offer, but I'm not making any decisions until after I speak with Oliver and the judge." I won't be strong-armed into silence again. Sebastian's shoulders slumped. He nodded. I understand. Just think about it, for the sake of the children. With that, Sebastian rose and left the lounge. Harriet felt as though she'd been through a washing machine. Tim placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We need to tread carefully. A settlement could give you a quicker resolution, but also let Sebastian and Lucas off the hook. Harriet sighed, tears escaping down her cheeks. I know, but I can't let them keep pulling the strings. Not anymore. Harriet's condition improved enough for her to be discharged, but she was placed on strict bed rest. In the following weeks, she continued to review her options. The court date for final arguments was fast approaching. Tim had built a strong case using Oliver's files, but Harriet knew the Moretti legal team would fight ruthlessly to suppress them. Late one night, she received a desperate call from Oliver. Harriet, I think my father's onto me, he whispered, voice quivering. Someone's been tailing me. I'm scared, Harriet. I might leave the country for a while. Harriet's heart thundered. Leave Oliver. Are you sure? Oliver sounded resolute. I have a friend in Canada who will let me stay. My father can't find me there easily. I'm sorry to abandon you, but if I stay, I might end up... He trailed off, the implication chilling. Harriet felt an odd mixture of relief and guilt. She couldn't blame Oliver for wanting to protect himself. I understand, she said softly. Thank you for everything you've done. When Harriet hung up, she stared at her phone in disbelief. Oliver, her key witness, was fleeing. Would his testimony hold up without him physically present? Tim reassured her that the sworn statements and digital depositions would still be admissible. But Harriet sensed Lucas was tightening his net. The man was unrelenting in protecting the Moretti legacy. As the trial entered its final stages, Harriet mustered every ounce of courage. The courtroom was packed to capacity, the tension crackling in the air. Journalists had caught wind of the drama, splashing headlines like "Pregnant Wife versus Millionaire Mogul" across tabloids. Protesters and supporters vied for space outside the courthouse. Inside, Harriet took her seat beside Tim. Across the aisle, Sebastian looked haggard, as if sleep had eluded him for weeks. Next to him was Lucas, ever the imposing patriarch, radiating cold confidence. Avery Rothschild prepared her final arguments, while Tim organized a stack of evidence. Judge Whitfield banged her gavel. We are here to determine the custody arrangement for Ms. Harriet Moore and Mr. Sebastian Moretti, as well as address the financial disputes and allegations brought forth by Ms. Moore. Avery launched into a meticulously orchestrated defense, painting Harriet as a jilted wife, exaggerating Sebastian's flaws. She disputed the authenticity of Oliver's data, claiming it was taken out of context. She even suggested that Harriet had collaborated with Oliver to concoct false evidence for financial gain. When it was Tim's turn, he wasted no time. He presented documents that not only confirmed Harriet's account, but showed the deep involvement of Lucas Moretti in orchestrating shady deals, bank statements, emails, wire transfers. Then he revisited Oliver's deposition, which pointed to a systemic pattern of intimidation within the Moretti family. Sebastian was called to the stand. He avoided Harriet's gaze. Under Tim's cross-examination, Sebastian admitted that Harriet had known about some of his father's questionable dealings which concerned her. He struggled to justify why he'd pursued a custody battle so aggressively, eventually conceding that he had been under strong familial pressure. Finally, Lucas Moretti took the stand. The courtroom fell into a dead hush. With a calm, almost dismissive demeanor, he denied any wrongdoing. He claimed the documents Tim presented were misunderstandings or routine business transactions. But Harriet noticed a slight tightening around Lucas's eyes when confronted with certain emails, like the one urging Sebastian to handle Harriet. Tim pointed to it. Mr. Moretti, can you clarify the meaning behind this email you sent your son? You specifically said, handle Harriet. She cannot be allowed to tarnish the Moretti name. Could you explain what you intended by handle? Lucas's jaw clenched. I was referring to a private matter, he replied evasively. I wanted Sebastian to reconcile with Harriet in a way that wouldn't cause public scandal. Tim bore down. Are you sure you didn't mean to pressure or intimidate Miss Moore into giving up her legal rights? A flicker of anger passed over Lucas's face. You can interpret it however you wish, but I know what I meant. Judge Whitfield took a deep breath, looking over the reams of evidence before her. Very well, I will make a decision after a brief recess. Court will be adjourned for 1 hour. Harriet felt lightheaded as she left the courtroom. Tim sat her down in a private waiting area with a glass of water. She could see the lines of exhaustion etched into Tim's face, yet he offered a small smile. We've done our best, he said. It's up to the judge now. Sebastian appeared in the hallway, hesitant. Tim stood up protectively, but Harriet motioned for him to let Sebastian approach. With a furtive glance around, Sebastian knelt by Harriet's chair. I know I said this before, and I know I'm late, he murmured. But I'm sorry, truly. Harriet stared at him, searching for sincerity. I loved you once, she whispered, tears welling up. Why couldn't you have done the right thing from the start? Sebastian hung his head. I wish I had. Before Harriet could respond, a court official announced that Judge Whitfield was ready to deliver her ruling. Back in the courtroom, Judge Whitfield surveyed the silent crowd. I have reviewed all the evidence and testimony. This case is complex, involving significant allegations beyond the scope of a typical custody dispute. Nonetheless, my primary concern is the welfare of these unborn children. She turned to Harriet, her gaze gentle. Ms. Moore, you have provided compelling evidence of Mr. Moretti's aggressive behavior, financial manipulation, and involvement in unethical dealings. However, the court also recognizes Mr. Moretti's rights as the biological father. Then she shifted her gaze to Sebastian. Mr. Moretti, the evidence suggests you allowed your father's influence to guide your decisions, sometimes to the detriment of Ms. Moore's well-being. This court will not deny you access to your children, but your custody rights will be significantly limited unless you can prove a stable and nurturing environment. Sebastian's eyes flashed with relief, tinged with regret. Therefore, Judge Whitfield continued, I am granting primary custody to Miss Moore with structured visitation for Mr. Moretti once the children are born. Mr. Moretti, you will be required to undergo parenting counseling and demonstrate adherence to the court's guidelines. Financial support will be mandated as per standard calculations based on your significant income. She paused, letting the gravity of the moment sink in. Regarding the financial and corporate allegations, those matters extend beyond the immediate custody case. However, I am forwarding the relevant evidence to the appropriate authorities for further investigation. If wrongdoing is confirmed, there may be criminal or civil consequences. A collective intake of breath filled the courtroom. Lucas Moretti's face darkened, but he remained silent. Harriet felt as though a 1,000-pound weight had lifted off her. She had won the right to keep her children safe. But she also knew this wasn't the end. Lucas would face legal scrutiny, and Sebastian would have a chance to turn his life around. Or not. Judge Whitfield concluded the court expects all parties to respect this ruling in good faith, remembering that children should never be used as pawns in a power struggle. This case is adjourned. A burst of murmurs erupted as the gavel came down. Harriet sank into her chair, tears of relief streaming down her face. Tim squeezed her shoulder, his expression triumphant. She glanced over at Sebastian, who stared at her with a mixture of sorrow and acceptance. Lucas was already on his feet, walking out with his team, a thunderous scowl on his face. In the corridor outside, cameras flashed incessantly. Reporters shoved microphones at Harriet, asking for statements. She had none to give beyond a soft thank you to those who supported her. Instead, she let Tim handle the press. For Harriet, the only thing that mattered was that she had secured a future for her children. In the weeks after the verdict, Harriet moved into a charming countryside cottage near her hometown, far from the marble confines of the Moretti penthouse. She focused on her health with the twins' due date inching closer. Occasionally, she got updates from Tim about the ongoing investigation into the Moretti empire. Rumor had it that Lucas was fighting potential charges, but his once unassailable reputation had been permanently stained. Sebastian reached out a few times, keeping a respectful distance, asking about Harriet's health and whether she needed anything for the twins. Harriet remained polite but cautious. She agreed to keep an open line of communication for the children's sake, but she made it clear that Sebastian would have to prove his commitment through consistent, positive actions. Late one crisp autumn evening, Harriet went into labor. After 18 hours of intense contractions, she gave birth to two healthy baby girls, Eliana and Sophia. The moment she held them, Harriet wept, overwhelmed by a love so fierce it eclipsed all the turmoil she had endured. A nurse gently placed the girls in Harriet's arms, their tiny hands grasping at her finger. For the first time in a long time, Harriet felt a peaceful sense of hope. Sebastian arrived at the hospital the next day, carefully knocking on Harriet's door before entering. He looked nervous, carrying a bouquet of white lilies. Harriet nodded for him to come in. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Harriet gestured toward the sleeping twins in their bassinets. "Meet your daughters," she said softly. Sebastian approached with trembling steps, tears shining in his eyes. He gently touched Eliana's tiny hand. "They're beautiful," he whispered. Harriet watched him, uncertain but willing to let him share this moment. In that quiet hospital room, there were no lawyers or judges, no swirling controversies, just two new parents and the miracle of life. Sebastian stayed for a while, then left, promising to respect Harriet's boundaries. Harriet sensed the sincerity in his voice, though she remained guarded. Life after that took on a calmer rhythm. Harriet dedicated her days to caring for Eliana and Sophia, relishing their every coo and smile. Tim helped her navigate the financial arrangements with Sebastian, ensuring the children had the support they needed without Harriet becoming entangled in Moretti family drama. It wasn't a perfect ending. Sebastian still had to face the consequences of his and his father's actions. But Harriet had found safety and love in the arms of her daughters. That was more than enough. Through the tumultuous journey, lawsuits, betrayals, heartbreak, Harriet emerged with a strength she never knew she possessed. She had stared down the might of the Moretti Empire and, in the end, protected her children. Whenever Harriet remembered the day she walked into the courtroom heavily pregnant and terrified, she smiled. The judge's one simple question to Sebastian, "Are these children truly yours?" had propelled a drama that tested everyone's limits. Yet it also birthed a chance for redemption and new beginnings. Harriet's story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. She risked it all, her safety, her reputation, and her peace of mind to protect the two lives growing inside her. In a world dominated by wealth and power, Harriet proved that truth, courage, and a mother's love could prevail. Even the towering Moretti Empire couldn't break her resolve. If this story moved you, inspired you, or kept you on the edge of your seat, please take a moment to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more riveting tales of drama, perseverance, and triumph to life. Remember, true strength comes from standing your ground, no matter how formidable the opposition. Thank you for watching, and see you in our next story.